Good morning and happy Thursday, everyone. Welcome to the California African American Water Education Foundation's fourth Water Series broadcast, Connections 2021 Communications Upgrade. I'm going to be your moderator, Nikisha Henry, and I just want to welcome all of you to today's very important and very necessary conversation. Today's broadcast is brought to you by our sponsor, California Association of Sanitation Agencies. CASA has served as the leading voice for clean water agencies on regulatory, legislative, and legal issues, representing more than 120 local public agencies dedicated to protecting public health and the environment. So before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. If you are viewing us on YouTube right now and you have any questions, please do not hesitate to email them to info@caawef.org. And if you're viewing us live on Facebook right now, all you have to do is type them right below in the comments. So here's the deal, you guys. Zoom calls, webinar broadcasts, podcasts, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, live streaming services, and other tools are now our new norm for communications professionals. So for the next hour, that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking to experts about the need for upfront and honest communications with communities of color. So without further ado, let's meet today's panelists. I'm excited to bring them on. First up, we have Mr. Maurice Cheney with the Roseville Utilities Department and the president of the California Association of Public Information Officials. Welcome, Maurice.
Hi there, thank you.
So tell us a little bit tell our viewers, in about a minute or less, give us a quick intro and what it is that you do.
Absolutely, and thank you for having me today. Like you said, my name is Maurice Cheney. I'm the Public Information Officer for the City of Roseville Utilities Department, and I also serve as the president of the California Association of Public Information Officials. So in my day-to-day job, I help to effectively communicate to our customers all things related to utilities. We're an integrated utility service here in Roseville. We have about 135,000 customers. And our sole purpose, at least my sole purpose, is to effectively inform, educate, and engage our communities about everything related to their utility service. My other hat as the California Association of Public Information Officials, also known as CAPIO, I'm the president of an 800-member organization throughout the state of California. And our sole charge is to advance public sector communicators. So we work alongside of many state agencies, local agencies, and special districts to ensure that good government has the necessary elements to foster good communication. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. And the three words, communication is key. You are definitely upholding that with all that you do. So thank you so much. Our next panelist is Brendan Wonnacott, the president of Wonnacott Strategies.
Thank you very much. Brendan. Hi, thanks for having me today. I'm excited to be here. I have a pretty extensive background in the water industry over the last 10 years or so. In 2013, I started with Aqua and the Department of Water Resources, managing the Save Our Water campaign, which ran through the end of the drought, well, at least what we thought was the end of the drought. And outside of that, I work with the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, Glen Colusa Irrigation District, and have worked across the water world, helping communications both digitally but also traditionally, and helping water districts land their messages.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brendan. We can't wait to hear from you a little bit later on in the broadcast. Our next panelist is Larry Lee, the president and publisher of the Sacramento Observer. Hey, Larry.
Hey, Nikisha, how you doing this morning?
Good, can't complain.
All right, thank you so much for having me. For those that don't know, my name is Larry Lee. I'm president and publisher of the Sacramento Observer newspaper, second generation publisher, founded by my parents, Dr. William H. Lee and Catherine Lee. The Observer has been publishing here in Sacramento for nearly 57 years next month. We'll be celebrating, and I'm very happy to be building upon the history of really an award-winning newspaper. Many have considered us one of the best Black newspapers in the country, and we are building upon that. We are in the midst of quite a renaissance for the Observer, in the midst of doing a relocation, remodel for a new facility, rebuilding of our website, and redesign of our print products. So we've got some interesting and exciting things in store for our audience moving forward, which has been predominantly the African-American community here in Sacramento.
Yes, so awesome. Thank you so much, Larry. And happy early 57th anniversary. That's amazing. That is no easy feat. So thank you for all that your family has, done in the communications realm here in Sacramento. Now, we also have a very special guest joining us today, Mr. Dale Hunter, who currently serves as the Executive Director of CalWEF. So Dale, please tell us a little bit CalWEF and its purpose. Tell us about it.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. I have the honor of serving as the Executive Director for the California African American Water Education Foundation. We are a nonprofit statewide organization. We were formed in early 2019. Our focus is information and education for the African American community in California. We're governed by a fantastic board of directors, and we're just pleased to be in this space at this moment. This is the fourth broadcast, as the moderator mentioned. We started several months ago with a great program with the mayor of Stockton, Mayor Michael Tubbs. We also had Edgar Dimely, the chair of the Water Quality Committee, had a great discussion about, is your water safe? We followed that up with an excellent broadcast on diversity and inclusion. What does it mean in practice? Those are more than just words to a lot of folks. And then our broadcast a couple of weeks ago, my favorite, on Flint, Michigan, in terms of the water disaster there, what's happened since then. We had folks from Flint on the broadcast, as well as one of the legislators from the state of Michigan. One of the themes that came out of the Flint discussion was the importance of communication, both before, during, and after any type of crisis. And as our audience know, here in California, we've been dealing with multiple crises in addition to the pandemic and the economic uncertainty. Wildfires are a regular part of our life. Brendan mentioned the potential for drought. It seems like every couple of years we're getting ready for drought. So being ready and able to communicate to both the audiences and the internal employees is an important part of what we do. And so we wanted to pause for a minute and talk about upgrading our skills, upgrading the outreach as we talk to folks up and down the state about water going forward. I'm pleased we have a great panel. I'm going to step back and listen and learn, and I'll turn it over to the moderator.
Thank you so much, Dale, for everything that you're doing at CalWEF. And I'd like to tell our viewers, as he mentioned before, that stands for the California African American Water Education Foundation. So try saying that 3 times fast, okay? It is a mouthful, but they're doing so many things within our state, and it's so much needed. So thank you so much, Dale. So if we can just get all of our panelists on right now, I think we're ready to just jump right on in this thing. So, you guys, at this moment in history, honest, informed, fact-based, real-time communications on specific platforms that they use are more important than ever. So with the cumulative challenges of COVID and economic uncertainty and civil unrest has altered the communications landscape. In addition, we have climate change, environmental justice, racial injustice, water quality threats, and water rates will also dominate the 2021 policy debate. So I want to ask all of you, but starting with you, Maurice, how has your approach to communications with your customers evolved with our new norm?
Yeah, it's an incredible and a great question. So let me kind of take it in a couple parts. First and foremost, as far as context, as communication professionals, I mean, my sole job is to disseminate timely and relevant information. And part of that recipe is an art of persuasion to create an emotional response to build awareness, right? Because imagine as a consumer of information, there's a lot of information that is sort of in your mind, right? So how do we cut through that noise to encourage this emotional response that creates a call to action for people to take advantage of? And all that is about fostering trust and understanding. So here we are today in 2020. What we know about crises is that the stakes are incredibly high from a communication standpoint. And I'll give some examples of that. But it's not only what you say is important, but how you say it is even of greater importance. And let me sort of talk through that a little bit. And it's about communicating with urgency and increased frequency, which we're seeing at the governor's level, creating a sense of transparency and understanding. And also, and I think this is a key ingredient during the crisis, is communicating with empathy and compassion, because all of this together helps people adjust to the rapidly changing conditions of a crisis. But in our case, it's multiple crises converging all at once. So when we think about urgency, it encourages people to make that decision, right? The call to action in the city of Sacramento is wear your mask. The governor, Gavin Newsom, is wear your mask, shelter in place. So it helps to mitigate some harm. And it encourages people, like I said, to make those quick decisions. When we're transparent and open and honest, which we as consumers want, it helps build that trust. And we saw that during the 9/11 and Mayor Giuliani, where he was really open and transparent in his communication. And finally, really showing empathy, compassion, and conveying compelling messaging of hope really can foster resilience in times of crisis. So that's sort of the umbrella that I'm working with. So in our community for the city of Roseville, when you think about this pandemic, one of the things that we had to communicate, and water agencies throughout the state, was this need for reassurance, especially related to water, right? When we think about the pandemic early on, we didn't know how it spread, but many people in our community were wanting to understand, are our water supplies safe? So many water agencies throughout the state and even the country were sending and amplifying a message of it being safe, plentiful, and available, because people were in a state of mind where it was hectic, it was alarming, and they lost a sense of hope. Another message that was really important and amplified during the pandemic and still continues is the 2020 toilet paper shortage. And as a wastewater industry, when we think about that, right, people were buying flushable wipes. And if you think about the message as a wastewater utility, one of the things that we are chiefly talking about is reducing impacts to the sewer system. Flushable wipes, while they are flushable, they don't disperse. So that causes issues and concerns in our wastewater utility, and something that we continue to talk through and educate people on, especially in light of COVID. And then finally, one of the things that we're seeing across the state is one of the things that we're doing in Roseville is we launched a campaign early on during the campaign called We Are Roseville to remind our community that we are strong, we're resilient, and that our city is working on behalf of our community to maintain essential services while managing the crisis. And as we saw with the civic unrest and taking a stance, we use that same campaign to take a stance against inequality. So we use these campaigns as a beacon of hope, because that's what we need during this time, and to foster a sense of community.
Wow, that's amazing. You know what? The thing for me that hit home is when you said, a lot of times it's not what we communicate, but it's how we communicate it. And especially when we're talking about communities of color, because sometimes things can get missed, things can get misconstrued if it's not communicated in the proper way. And just like you also said, being that beacon of hope, because these are very trying times, you know, when we talk about all of these crises that are going on. And then when people dealing with personal things, those are just things within our community, in our state. But we also have people dealing with personal things with, you know, the distance learning with their children, and, you know, the mental health crises that are going on. So, you know, it's a lot. You have major big shoes to fill. So, you know, thank you for, you know, what you do in that as far as the public information and how you guys are delivering that information is much appreciated. Brendan, let's go with you next. How has your enterprise evolved with our new norm as far as virtual? Everything's virtual now. How have you evolved with that?
Thank you for the question. It's been a huge shift. I frequently say to clients that 2020 is the year of pivoting, and I think there has been a lot of growth over the last couple of years in the water industry in particular, taking that shift of looking at things like social media, for example. I think a lot of water agencies, water districts, public agencies were a little bit hesitant or tepid about stepping into the social media water several years ago. And I think what we saw over the last several months of this year is how important that pivot has been. Public agencies taking that step to go out and to really utilize social media and integrate digital and online communications with their full amount of communication resources has been huge. Touching on what Maurice talked about, Metropolitan in Southern California, they did a huge amount of communication right at the start of the pandemic around answering questions about water supply safety, which was vastly important. People had those questions. And one of the things that I think is important to touch on too, particularly with the digital aspect and the social media aspect, is that you're not just communicating to your customers, you're communicating to stakeholders, reporters, but also internally. It ends up being an internal communications tool for you as well. So by doing an active campaign to answer questions through social media, we had a huge response of people just getting information they were looking for and couldn't easily find. And the other side of it too, on the sanitation side, the huge lift that sanitation districts did in a matter of minutes once people started flushing things that should not be flushed as the toilet paper shortage went on. Yeah, that couldn't have happened 5 or 6 years ago. So I think this integration of digital, the integration of finding audiences, and to really make all of your communications work together has been a big theme of this year. That gets us to this summer with all the social justice efforts. And I think that a lot of folks may have been surprised to see public entities really starting to go out there and take a stand, where traditionally I think that somebody wouldn't necessarily expect a water district to post about Black Lives Matter.
Right.
But
right.
A lot did. And that's I think part of that shift, part of that pivot, where agencies and entities are really having this holistic look at communications and realizing it's not just about talking about conservation or rates or just water. It's about everything. And I think that's been a huge thing this year.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, Brendan. And you brought up a good point. You mentioned that usually we wouldn't see water districts or agencies coming forward and talking about Black Lives Matter and racial injustice. How important is that, when we talk about communication and reaching communities of color? How important is that? Because to me, I would think that's everything. If you guys want the community to hear you, we have to be able to relate, right? So How important is that? You brought up a very good point.
It's hugely important. And I think what it really gets to is that this shift over the last several years, and our political realm right now is crazy.
Yeah.
But I think that entities, businesses, corporations are seeing this moment as an opportunity to kind of get beyond this, we don't talk about politics, or we don't talk about issues that might be scary for people to talk about. It's not about, pushing that off to the side anymore. It's about embracing discussion and conversation and really getting out there with the messages of inclusion and really getting messages to all of the people that you serve as a public agency, which is everybody, and all of the people that work for you, which is everybody. So I think that's been a really big difference over the last year. I think for a lot of public agencies and even corporations.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your insight on that. And so moving on to you, Larry, you know, as you mentioned, the Sacramento Observer, it's going to be celebrating you guys are going to be having your 57th anniversary next month, which is astounding. But with that, over the years, there's been multiple changes and you know, evolving that the Observer has had to do. So now that we're in this new norm, as I said before, of everything being virtual and important for timely and effective communications going out, especially to communities of color, what has the Sacramento Observer done to keep up with the times?
Yeah. Thanks, Nikisha. I appreciate you again having me on the on this webcast. You know, I think there's a lot of there was a lot that was said and a lot there to unpack over the last few minutes here, where we've discussed some of the challenges that not just the community is facing, but obviously our individual utilities and agencies and businesses are facing. I think this is obviously 2020 has been one of those years that none of us will ever forget. This has been very challenging in many ways for the Observer, for the Black press in general. The funny thing is that you know, a lot of this stuff, while it is new, some of it is not new. The challenges that we faced, you know, media in general has been under siege for quite a while. The business side of publishing newspapers, literally thousands of community newspapers across the country have had to shutter their doors. You know, the pandemic has really exacerbated that for many news agencies. But what we've obviously have realized is that you know, our voice is more crucial now than it has ever really been before. We are in a time where you know, if you look at it from the business side, you know, as everyone clearly stated, people are getting information from you know, so many different sources.
Right.
Some of it is accurate, some of it is not, and so we have to be very diligent in trying to make sure that we have sustainable business models moving forward. I think the Observer has been we've been fortunate. We have been in a very important role in the community, and we've always tried to serve the community as best as we could. And I think in keeping that effort over the last few years, we've been making some harder decisions to kind of make sure that our sustainability model is prepared. So as difficult as this year has been, it has been it has really reinforced some of the changes that we were planning on making and that we have been making. As I mentioned at the top of the broadcast, we're in the midst of remodeling a new location. We had a beautiful facility in Oak Park for you know, for about 25 years, and we made a hard decision on kind of moving from there to a different part of town to really build and create a newsroom and a facility that reflects the 21st century and where we're going. So our new newsroom will be equipped with everything, with a studio to do video and audio recordings as well too, and it'll actually even be really kind of like a community hub. It'll be able to be very nimble to where we can open it up and host a lot of different events for the community. Obviously, this was planned pre-pandemic, but the facility would be able to, pre-pandemic, would be able to house about 100 people for different events. Obviously, that number won't be nearly that high moving forward, but it still will be a community gathering location. As I mentioned, we are in the midst of doing a print redesign that I think will give a fresh, new, and exciting delivery product for our audience. And then as far as the digital content, we're constantly trying to push the envelope for ourselves. We were the first Black newspaper in the country to deliver news to people on their cell phones via text messaging. And we stay engaged with our community and our audience on social media. We've done events such as this with webcasts and the like to really try and make sure that in the digital space, we are providing news and information to our community. So we've been really trying to work really hard at making those things happen. It is a challenge because the reality is, you know, there are lots of tools for lots of people to have megaphones and and vehicles to spread information. And I think the biggest challenge that many news organizations and consumers are really facing, to the point that everyone said, it's not just about the what and the how, but it's also who is delivering that message. And I think that that's the thing that we really have to be very diligent about. There's, as we know, there's been lots of stories revealed about the realities of disinformation that has been going through not just traditional media, but really through social media in a lot of ways. And if consumers aren't better educated and more mindful of the vehicles that they're trusting for their news and information, that disinformation can be sowed. And that's one of the beauties of the Black press, is that, you know, for more than 200 years, the Black press has really been there on behalf, speaking truth to power for communities, and particularly the African American community, and really trying to make sure that we have the greater trust of our community. And so trusted messengers is really critical. It's really important trying to make sure that you share that with communities, and communities will know. They know as much technology and things that are out there. There is definitely an information gap, and our readers know that when they see it in the pages of the paper or of the Observer or online, that they know that we have their best interest at heart.
Right, absolutely. And you brought up something that I never really thought about per se, and that is consumers also have a responsibility. So we know the press and the media has a responsibility to, like you said, do the research, analyze the data, make sure that accurate information is being put out to the audience. But alongside with that, though, it's like teamwork. The consumers do have a responsibility to make sure that they're getting their information from trusted sources. There's a lot of press out there, and there's a lot of people, because of social media, they think they're the press. Everybody wants to be the first with breaking news and hot stories and all of that. But as consumers, we absolutely have to be diligent in who it is that we're trusting and following in getting our information. So great point, Larry. Thank you so much for bringing that up. So while I have you, I do want to ask you one more question. As a second generation owner and publisher of the Sacramento Observer, what specific things, I know you talked about some of them before. Well, you actually talked about a lot of the things that you guys are implementing now. And you said it was in the works pre-COVID, but I think with this pandemic, it kind of pushed you guys into doing it a lot sooner. So speaking of this amazing new facility that you guys are putting together, how different is that going to be in this time that we're in versus how you guys have been operating?
Sure. I think the beauty of pretty much all of this, and like I said, with the pandemic, what it's done is it has kind of normalized, communication just like this. I mean, this is I think this is the third one of these that I've done in like the last 4 or 5 days. It has normalized that in a way that I think we were planning it already. But what has happened, as you said, the pandemic kind of accelerated that. And so now, our audience is, and audiences in general are becoming more comfortable with being able to have a forum like this. The cool thing about technology, right, is you can take a subject matter, dive deep in it, and like you guys are doing right now, you can have an actual engagement with an audience. And in real time, see how people feel about different things. So I think it's still being responsible, which is extremely important. Being a responsible news organization is that at the end of the day, that's what we do. But really trying to make sure that people's voices are heard. Just like everyone said, the uprising from communities has really sparked a new level of engagement from people. I think people are no longer willing to just allow themselves to be talked to, but want to make sure that they are a part of the conversation. They want to make sure that, if they are doing business with a company, that company not only articulates the fact that, diversity matters, inclusion matters, but that they have actual efforts and they put actual meat behind those words, and walk the walk as well too. So, I wrote a column earlier this year about how important it is to, while we have all these beautiful organizations and businesses that are saying messages about how important Black lives are and how they support this movement. But to ignore the Black press in helping to tell that message really does a disservice because it looks disingenuous. It does not look like it's genuine. So having these types of forums with trusted messengers is important. Just being creative in a 21st century way is really challenging. But the one thing I don't want to forget to say is that while those things are really cool and the technology side of things is really exciting, the reality is there is a tremendous technology gap that the African American community is facing. We just did an event in South Sacramento where we were talking to community folks, and their number one concern was technology. And not having access to technology. If you think about what the pandemic has now done, it has forced you to be, current with technology. If you don't have access to high-speed internet, if you don't have the equipment in your home, your kids are not getting educated. You don't have access to shopping. You don't have access to news and information. You don't have access to just about almost anything about your everyday life. And so that has really become something that is extremely important for our community to pay attention to. And it also heightens the fact that those of us that have vehicles that aren't just technology based, right? So we have a print product. And so being able to get out to the community, to those who are disconnected, is extremely important because as we've seen, this gap is widening. Not just the technology gap, but the financial gaps and homelessness and things like that. So being able to affect people's lives who don't have access to high-speed internet and the like is extremely important too. So that's why we feel like this is a really important time for us to have not only the digital and the technology side, but the print product that is engaging and educational as well too, and can help move people's lives is really important during this time as well.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head with that. It's just the gap, the technology gap, it is huge, but thankful for, organizations like yourself and the BSBA, the Black Small Business Association, for their technical assistance program for, people within communities of color. It's so needed. So thank you so much for bringing that point up because we cannot forget that in all of this. So thank you, Larry. But I would like to bring on Brendan next, if we can get Brendan on. Welcome back. So, I want to kind of talk about some of the challenges. I know Larry, talked about the gap with the technical accessibility, especially within communities of color. But obviously, this pandemic, COVID-19 has changed the way that we just do business, period. And we don't know if it'll ever go back to the way that it was. And so traditional methods of communication are relied on less as we move into this new information technology age. So what challenges, Brendan, have some of your clients experienced during this time, and how were you able to help them pivot through those challenges?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to steal Larry's answer a bit here.
No, it's okay.
I think one of the biggest challenges that we're facing right now is misinformation, and either intentional misinformation campaigns or unintentional misinformation, where people just have the wrong information or the wrong idea about issues. I think it goes back to some of our experience around the drought, where people would come up with all sorts of conspiracy theories about where the drought had come from. Oh, it's man-made. What all of those issues, and I think that there was a little bit of a struggle in addressing some of that because there was, and I think it goes back to the pivot that I talked about a little bit earlier. It's like this concern about making sure that everybody's voice is heard and everybody feels heard. I think there was this hesitance early on in addressing issues like this, in addressing misinformation, because it's like, well, yeah, you're wrong. You don't see public agencies say that often. You don't see businesses say that often directly to a customer online. And that has started to shift this year in particular. I think that, particularly around the pandemic, the misinformation that is out there, there's been a much more aggressive effort by the public entities to really tamp that down, get that out of the way, and get people focused on the truth. And I think that, one of the things going forward that's going to be very important is that coordination with the press, and to really make sure that the right information is getting out and questions are being answered appropriately by the appropriate people, and not just some random person said this on Facebook or whatever it might be. I think the other thing that's been a real challenge on the technology side has been those traditional points of engagement. Outside of my water work, I do a lot of work in the retail sphere, helping grocers and such in certain public processes. And one of the problems that we've seen is that traditional points of contact, such as public hearings, are gone. So where you would normally be able to organize people to come out to speak in favor of a particular project or something, that's all gone. And now you're having to mobilize and get people organized in much different methods and ways that you traditionally would. And I think for public agencies, the hard part has been that shift in, from having public board meetings where you do usually have some of the general public show up, and that the shift to Zoom meetings and such, where now the opportunity for people to come is much wider. So you potentially are going from an audience of a couple dozen to maybe hundreds or even thousands, depending on what the issue might be or where you might be located. So I think that's been a really big challenge, I think, for public agencies that are used to a certain way of doing things. And that's going to be something that I think is going to end up sticking through this, is this idea of virtual attendance at meetings and virtual attendance of the public in a sphere where that traditionally wasn't the case.
Absolutely. And I think, you also brought up a great point, because everything now is virtual attendance. So how do you think, because it seems like it would be more convenient to, let me just throw on a shirt, throw on some shorts, and just attend this, this board meeting that's coming up tonight. And I don't even have to leave the comforts of my own home. We would think, obviously, that's more convenient and more people would want to do it that way. But there are a lot of people who are traditional, who want to show up, who want to be seen face to face, who want to interact with, public entities face to face on certain issues. So how do we, as a community, as far as communications go, how do we motivate people, those type of people and customers, to be engaged virtually as if they would be in person?
Well, I ain't gonna lie, I'm wearing shorts right now. So
the
advantage of being at home virtual is huge. There is something missing, though. That interaction, the feedback you get face to face in meetings. And this goes beyond just the public meetings. This is internal meetings for agencies, and it's a sea shift in that's a bit of a tongue twister, in the way that we have to approach work and human interaction. And it's very difficult. It's been rocky for a lot of folks this year, particularly for children and distance learning, as my 2 elementary aged kids break for lunch. But it's one of those things, I think, that going forward, when we are eventually able to get together in groups, it's not going to be the same as it once was. There is going to be a bit of this hybrid nature of things. And figuring that out is going to take some time and it's going to take some effort. But I think that, eventually we'll hopefully get to a point where everybody's comfortable in whatever the communications might be, be it virtual, in person, or some sort of mixture of the two.
Yeah. And I think, just as consumers and customers, I think it's really important, especially for all of our viewers that are watching right now, to understand that our voice is our voice. It doesn't matter if it's virtual. It doesn't matter if it's face-to-face, mask on, mask off. Our voice is our voice. And especially during these trying times, we need to be heard.
Yep.
Period.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Thank you, Brendan, for that. And I would like to bring Maurice back on. Hey, Maurice, glad you're still with us. So, with everything that you do, being a public information officer, especially in the city of Roseville, where obviously that area is not predominantly African American or the minority, as far as minorities living there and being in that area. Communities of color typically tend to overlook messages that we don't feel are specifically targeted to us, right? So what measures are the California Association of Public Information Officials taking within your agency, especially during this pandemic, to ensure that folks, especially us, communities of color, are actually getting the information that we need and not just overlooking it?
Well, thank you for that question. And let me take a step back and talk about what Capio is and how there's the intersection between Capio, the people who are members of Capio, and how we advance the ideal of inclusion and diversity.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned, Capio is an 800-member organization throughout the state of California at various levels and agencies, and represents a diverse collective of communities throughout our state. Some, like Roseville, not as diverse, in other communities where it's incredibly diverse. So knowing your target audience is important. But I will say this, for the past 50 years, our sole charge as Capio is to advance government sector communicators by offering educational and enrichment opportunities so that they are provided the best service for the agencies for whom they work. Because as I mentioned before, at the end of the day, irrespective of the pandemic, irrespective of any other crises, good government requires good and inclusive communications. And so during our 50 years, we've evolved. But what we know for a fact is our whole goal is reaching all those people, including the underserved and the underrepresented. So as an example, during 2020, we kind of shift our focus to doing things in person. And now we've amplified and increased our offerings online. So a lot of the things that we've talked about today related to our target audience and how we're communicating, Capio is behind the scenes and offering services and resources online about COVID and what other communities are doing to help communicate what needs to be communicated tied to the pandemic. So we've done workshops and webinars free for our members so that they have the tools and the necessary things to be able to communicate in their community. You didn't ask this question, but I want to talk through sort of how we're evolving as well in the space of diversity and inclusion. It's near and dear to my heart. Capio made a stance against inequality, and we're putting, we're taking that talk and actually implementing some key things associated with diversity and inclusion, so that our members understand the gravity of what's going on and the importance of introducing processes to reduce barriers for information sharing. I think a couple of examples, we actually had an amazing webinar probably about 6 weeks ago from a diversity and inclusion manager from the city of Sacramento. And it had to do with choice points and how you can weave in decision-making into a process to ensure that you are reaching everyone possible that you can. And it might be that it may be a racial barrier, or might be issues with technology and the generational divide. So built into many of the communication planning that we do, and then even operationally, we need to think and disrupt the status quo and ensure that we are being very diverse and inclusive of everything that we do. But I will leave you with this, and all that we teach as part of the California Association of Public Information Officials, a foundational element of communications and public relations is truly really knowing your audience. So we know our audience in Roseville. But in other communities, this should be done before a crisis occurs.
Right.
So you must understand the ethnic, the socioeconomic, the generational representation of the community, and provide channels both online and offline, because we have talked about the digital divide, that your target audience uses to build a plan surrounding it and include a level of inclusion. So baked into any communication plan that I work on, and many of our communicators throughout the state, the first thing that we look at is our target audience and figure out what barriers for engagement and entry that we can overcome to ensure that they're part of the democratic process.
I really love that, because a lot of times, agencies will just, they'll type up a release and just put the information out there without, like you said, realizing what are the who's our target audience? What are the barriers? I think that's really, really important, because you can say all that you want to say all day, every day, but if it's not being received by, the target audience that you're trying to reach, it's wasted energy, it's wasted time, and more importantly, it's wasted resources. Because a lot of the times, especially when we're talking about communities of color, they aren't receiving, the full-on information, either because they feel like it's not pertaining to them, or like you said, there's barriers there. There could be language barriers, other things that go along with that, socioeconomic disadvantages, to where, sometimes they are the ones who really need to hear this information, but they're missing it altogether. So such a great point that you brought up. Thank you so much for that, Maurice. At this time, I would like to bring all of our amazing panelists back into the broadcast. The information that you guys have shared thus far is definitely invaluable and so much appreciated and needed. This conversation is so important. But I do want to ask you guys, just we talked a little bit about social media. And as we all know, there's pros and cons. Social media could be so great, and it could just be so sometimes. So what are some of the challenges, if any, that you guys have experienced with social media when it pertains to communicating with your target audience and or consumers? And anyone can just, can go first, tap in.
Who wants to start?
You got something, Maurice. Yeah, go ahead, kick it off.
You spoke, Maurice.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I've been in the industry 20 years, and with the advent of the internet and now social media, one might argue that it makes our jobs easier. And in fact, it actually adds a layer of complication sometimes. I love social media in that it allows organizations like ours to be able to share information, quote, unfiltered, in a way to help really deliver the message to our community. But as we all know, and what we're starting to see, is there's this level of censorship, or in the case of Facebook, we're always reliant on trying to trick the algorithm, right? Because as we all know, as consumers of information, we don't see everything on our newsfeed. And so constantly trying to change our engagement strategies to ensure that the message that we're trying to deliver is actually a message that people are going to receive. But I will say that in the city of Roseville, our customer base is really digitally connected. And so they actually receive our information. So on the one hand, it can be incredibly difficult to use, but on the other hand, it gives us significant advantages, especially on platforms like Nextdoor, where we can actually target specific neighborhoods to help deliver a message. But I will say too, along the lines of misinformation, I think it's prudent and important for us as consumers of information to really validate using news media outlets that have been there for years beyond social media and the internet, to make sure that the information that we're receiving is accurate and it's fair and objective.
Absolutely. So algorithms, definitely a huge challenge. Anybody else like to chime in?
Maurice, he hit the nail on the head. I mean, the issue with social media, on our side of things, is that, in a lot of ways it's pay to play. So, if you have 100,000 followers on Facebook and you just throw up a Facebook post, maybe 900 people are going to see that. And that's how they've monetized this, and that's fair. That's their business. So we can't necessarily begrudge them for that. But it does make it difficult for public agencies in particular, because you don't have a huge pocket of funds to get information out. So I think part of it is really working with, at least on my side, working with my clients to figure out what their strategy is in terms of who their audiences are, who they need to get this information to, and really working with each platform separately to come up with what that strategy of engagement might be. Sometimes it's going to be paid, sometimes it's not. And, sometimes it's as simple as just creating an Instagram account to throw up a bunch of historical pictures for your centennial, which is what we did with Glen Close Irrigation District this year. And, we haven't put any money behind that, but it's taken off, and it's been a huge thing for that community. So sometimes those things just kind of work.
Yeah, and I think the pay to play, I never really noticed as many sponsored posts pre-pandemic and pre-COVID as I do now. It's almost every single post from an entity or an agency is sponsored now, because like we said, the algorithms, and now Facebook has capitalized on this because they know that certain messages are crucial and need to be put out there, especially in a time like this with elections and everything that's going on. So I can definitely see the pay to play and, having a certain budget or lack thereof being an issue for that. So thank you so much for bringing that up, Brendan. So we've got algorithms, pay to play. Larry, is there anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think Maurice and Brendan hit it pretty well. I think for consumers is again knowing and understanding. It's the business. Social media is a business. It is, and it's one of the greatest businesses that exists in the world today. And recognizing that it is just that, right? So having hot takes and other things, it's unfortunate. Good news travels fast, but bad news and salacious news moves way faster.
Yeah.
And so we have to be very mindful that that's part of their business model, is to make you go deep down into a hole that oftentimes might or might not be rooted in truth and facts. And so it's really important that consumers recognize that. And like Maurice and Brendan said, making sure that you validate that sort of information that you're getting, and make sure that it's trusted messenger that you're getting it from is extremely important.
Yes. So you guys that are watching, our viewers, validate before hitting that share button, because the share button could be detrimental. That share button, whew, okay. That's a whole nother talk show.
Pause before you press.
Right. Dale, would you like to, anything else? So we've got the share button and validating, algorithms, pay to play. Any other challenges that you see with social media in today's communication?
I would just say be careful of that 4 a.m. Facebook rant, because it might show up somewhere else. So that is the downside of social media, is it's out there. And so you can't pull it back when you wake up. I would also say part of why I love this discussion is information is king. We're in the information business. How you transmit that information, how you receive that information, that's critical going forward. And that's why I'm so pleased we had the experts today. I heard a couple of very important things. One, we can't be tone deaf. There's stuff happening outside the window, and I'm glad the water and wastewater industry have stepped up and have adopted some very important statements across our state. So you can't be tone deaf, and I'm really pleased about that. Secondly, Larry mentioned it, access.
Yes.
I mean, they're sending information to you on your phone. And so access is real important. And I know in our community, we've got to get a little better at getting that access, but how you get information pretty soon. In fact, in some cases, you can get it on your watch. The other thing that I would just add would be sustainability. We're not going back, folks. This form of communication look like it's the way forward. Someone mentioned you could have a public meeting, 7 people show up, you put it on Zoom, you got 1,500 people that's participating although not in public. So I think this form of communication is probably the way of the future. And then finally, the messenger does matter. In today's environment, trusted communicators are important. And so the messenger is just as important as the message, and having people that you trust and you get your information from is real important as we go forward. Those are the points I just wanted to highlight, and a special thanks to our moderator for walking us through the upgrade. Everybody's going through an upgrade right now, and we've taken a moment to pause and to figure out what the upgrade should look like going forward, and thank everybody for taking this time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, as we are coming to a close, time does fly when you are having fun conversations, and you guys have been awesome on our panel this morning. But I would like to get just any last words from each of you, and I'll call you in the order that I see you on my screen. So let's start with you, Maurice. Any last few quick words? Yeah.
Yeah, so as I was reflecting on this discussion today and prepping for it as well, one of the things that I like to do is kind of illustrate it with a quote. And the quote is if you just communicate, you can get by. But if you communicate skillfully, you can work miracles. And what I take from that is that organizations should have a communications person to help with engagement strategies and the ability to communicate and humanize the organization. And on the flip side of that, when we think about communication and it being an engagement model, right? It's not two-way anymore. It's like everyone is part of the equation of engagement. Is being mindful when you hit that share button to make sure that you're sharing information that you can support and that is real and valid. And like I said, communication and the way in which we're communicating today, we're at sort of a precipice where this is sort of a new frontier for us from a communication standpoint. And I'm actually very excited that we're living through this history, and I'm actually looking forward to a new reset in 2021. But for now, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Maurice, for those last words. Brendan, any last thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. I'm with you on that reset in 2021. One of the things that's really struck me this year in particular on the communications side is thoughtfulness and how important it is to keep that in mind throughout every last thing that we do. Just yesterday, there was an example on Twitter where a public health official in Oregon was doing a news conference dressed as a clown, where she happened to be announcing the latest hospitalization and death figures for COVID in her county. That's it. Yeah, it's Halloween, but at the same time, adding that layer of thoughtfulness across your communications and having a communications professional who's there to advise you to maybe take off the makeup before you go on screen is an important thing. So I think, the biggest takeaway I have from this year is always maintain that thoughtfulness.
Amazing. Maintain thoughtfulness. Thank you so much, Brendan. And last but certainly not least, Larry.
I'm still stuck a little bit off of about the what Brendan just said. That's absolutely crazy. But I think this is a challenging time. I think what we all have to recognize is that we are all in this together. There is no left side of the boat that's leaking or right side of the boat that's leaking. The boat is leaking. And we just have to figure out a way to fix it in a way that is inclusive and to Brendan said, thoughtful. As a newspaper publisher, while these times are challenging, I am seeing across the landscape of a level of collaboration from media outlets in a way that I had not seen before, and I'm really excited about it. We're doing some things with some of our other fellow Black newspapers, as well as those not even in our own, that are focused on the African American community. So it's an exciting time, challenging time nonetheless, but I think while this is a challenging time, it requires greatness from our publications, and I think many of those that are worth their salt are ready to step up.
Very well said. And that right there, ladies and gentlemen, is how you drop the mic. But listen, I have to give our panelists, you guys, a 10, okay? All of you have been so awesome today. Thank you so very much. And to all of our viewers, all of you that tuned in and shared your time with us, we do definitely appreciate you. And just, our great panel, all of the information that was shared today, you guys, obviously, it's a very trying time. We are all in this together. Communication is key, and we can definitely get through this. And I also want to give a huge shout out to CalWEF and the Black Small Business Association, also known as BSBA, for just continuing to, bring these broadcasts on a weekly basis, because it's so much needed, especially within our community. So you guys, as always, until next time, please take care of yourselves, stay safe out there, and vote. There's only a few days left. Please, if you haven't done so already, make sure you vote. Let your voices be heard. Thank you guys so much. Panelists, you guys are awesome. 10s across the board. Everyone have a great day.